Hey guys, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to take a look at a battery from a company called WattCycle. Now I haven't reviewed any batteries from WattCycle, so this is all new to me, but looking online, they had pretty good pricing deals on these batteries, and I wanted to kind of take a look and see what this particular brand was all about. So we will be getting inside the battery later in the video, but before we do that, we're going to run it through the paces, and then before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the specs. So this is a 200 amp hour battery, 12 volt, as it says right on the front. It's also got a 200 amp BMS. Most typical 12 volt 200 amp hour batteries still have a 100 amp BMS. And what that means is having a 200 amp BMS means it's rated for a continuous charge and discharge rate of a full 200 amps, which might come in handy for you if you need to pull something, more than a typical 2000 watts of power. Now, it has I think for up to 5 seconds, up to a 300 amp plus or minus 50 amps capability, and then the BMS will cut you off. So for just a few 5 seconds, you can get 300 to 350 amps out of this thing, even though it's rated for 200 amps continuous. So we're going to test that. It also has low temp protection, which is nice if you live in an area where it regularly gets below freezing at certain times of the year. So that means that this thing will cut off charging. The BMS will sense the temperature on the inside of the battery, and it should cut off charging so that you don't damage the cells inadvertently by maybe attempting to solar charge or charge with an AC charger when the battery is actually too cold to be able to do that safely without damaging the cells. So we're going to test that as well and see if that works as designed. Let's talk a little bit about the dimensions. So I got some notes here. The dimensions on this, it's just about 19 inches long in this direction. Deep wise, I think it's about 6.7 inches, and then it is just a little over 9 inches to the top. I think 9.15 inches to be exact. And notice that the terminals are actually recessed, which is nice. So you can stack these and the terminals won't get in the way. It does come with an extra set of battery studs and insulating caps, if that's something that you need. I usually put insulating caps on there once I have my wiring done, just as one extra simple layer of protection. And in terms of weight, this thing weighs in at just a hair over 45 pounds. Pretty typical for a 200 amp hour 12 volt battery. And it does have a couple of UL certifications. It has UL 2271 and UL 1642, I believe. So that's nice to know that it is UL certified as well. Now you can combine this up to 4S 4P configurations, which would give you a combined total of just under 41 kilowatt hours, which is nice if you're wanting to build something extra large. And it does have an IP, I think it's either 65 or an IP67 weather resistance rating. In either case, I believe you can safely expose this to rain. It might be briefly submersible in water, but I think if it's IP65, that's probably not the case. But rain, definitely not really a problem for this thing. It should be able to withstand the normal elements just fine. And it does come with a user guide as well. Forgot to mention that. So I think that's about all we can talk about right now. Let's get this thing into the testing, see if it lives up to the specs, and then we'll get inside and see what the build quality looks like. All right, let's do a capacity test. I've got this thing fully charged up. I actually charged it several days ago, and it's sort of been resting for 4 or 5 days without charge. So we're gonna find out if we can pull a full 200 amps or 200 amp hours out of this battery. So I've calibrated my smart shunt, which I have over here on the left, and I have got the tablet running the smart shunt software, and we're currently reading 13.94 volts, not pulling any amperage, and I've got it calibrated to 100%. So we're going to go ahead and run this all the way down with a load that I've got on an inverter that's just out of shot here. Let me go ahead and turn that on, and I think we'll start counting up the watts. See, the inverter is now just starting to turn on, and we're going to start seeing those watts count up. And we are up to just under 1700 watts. We're pulling 130 amps. Now I'm guessing my AC inverter is probably going to shut off due to its built-in low voltage cutoff. And if that's the case, I'll probably have to apply a DC load after the fact and then take this down all the way until the BMS actually shuts us off. But in any case, we should be able to get an actual value of the real amp hours that we're able to pull. So we'll check back when it's done. All right, the test has completed. I've gone ahead and hooked up a battery charger to the battery, bypassing the shunt, so I'm not affecting the shunt data in any way. And if we zoom in over here, you can see that our deepest discharge here was 199 amp hours. So we got very close to the 200 amp hours. And I think I'm going to fully recharge this, and we're going to run the test one more time just to see if we get a consistent result or not. And we'll see how test number 2 fares. All right, we are fully charged. Let me go ahead and get the AC inverter cooking again. AC inverter fan just kicked on again, and we'll start the other DC tester so we can fully deplete that down till the BMS shuts us off. So we're zeroed out, and we are accumulating amp hours. So check back in the morning, see how we did. All right, discharge test number 2 is done. The BMS is completely shut down. Let me go ahead and get the little battery tester out of the way here. And I will hook up a charge unit to bypass the shunt so I can at least get power to the shunt, and then we'll see what our results were. All right, Bluetooth unit is back online. Let me log in here. We got 201 amp hours. So we actually improved by a couple of amp hours. But in any case, we definitely got our 200 amp hours and then a little bit more on top of it. So capacity definitely checks out on this WattCycle 200 amp hour battery. All right, now we're going to do a load test on this battery and find out if we can pull that full 200 amps that this BMS is supposedly rated for. Now, to do that safely, I have to make sure that the cabling that I have coming from the battery to the bus bars is capable of 200 amps. So I've got 2-aught cable here just out of sight. This is a big, thick 2-aught gauge cable, and I've got that over here coming from the on the other side of the shunt here going up to the bus bar for the negative side. But I did notice, I'm glad I caught this, I actually only have 2-gauge cable on the other side that was making the battery connection. And 200 amps will eventually create a problem for this cable, because this 2-gauge cable is only really rated for about 120 amps. Now I've got 2-gauge cable coming from the bus bars over to my my AC inverters. And by the way, disregard this. This is not ideal because I've got this cable stretched the maximum length. I would not normally do this. This is just a temporary setup. But I do need to swap this little 2-gauge cable here out with this 2-aught gauge cable here so that I make sure that this is a safe connection to the battery. I just thought I'd point that out because I think it's important to kind of describe what I'm doing. So let me go ahead and do that. So now that I've got this all set up, let me go ahead and zoom this in a bit. And I'll just zoom that right there so we can keep our eye on that value right there. And then I have got a 10-minute timer that I'm going to set there. In fact, let me zoom down a little bit so you can see that. And once we get the 200 amps going, we're going to make sure that we can pull that for a full 10 minutes. So let me go ahead and switch on my main disconnect to the inverters to get them powered up, and we're going to start adding load. You see the inverters themselves combined on 2 inverters are pulling about 1.5 amps. Actually, the other inverter just kicked in, so now we are at 2.25, 2.3 amps, something like that.
Yeah, 220, 221, whatever it takes.
All right, let's start adding some load. And we are currently, no pun intended, at 100 amps. Okay, let me see if I can get this a little bit further. Hopefully I don't trip my inverters here. And we are at 150 amps. Take it one more level up. 203. Let's go ahead and start the timer and see if we can get away with that. We're at 207 amps. All right, I cut the test short, not because of the battery, but because I was using my thermal camera and I noticed that this particular crimp up here was getting extraordinarily hot. This must not be a very good crimp, and it must be generating a lot of resistance and heat. So I was pulling in excess of, well in excess of 200 degrees. In fact, even right now, at 100 amps, I'm still pulling 235 degrees off that one contact point going to the battery. So that is not great. I think in order to safely perform the full 10 minutes, I would probably need to redo that crimp. I certainly don't want to risk a fire. And this is why I recommend, using a little thermal camera like this guy right here. This is this particular one I bought on Amazon. I forget how much it was, but it's by a company called TopDon. You attach the camera to your phone's USB-C port. You enable the thermal imaging, and then it will start showing you a very quick visual over, and you can see how much more hot that particular cable is. And I can put the cursor over that and see how hot that is. And it's dropped down. We're now into the 176 degree range, down from about 230 or 250 degrees, which is way too much for that cable. All right, since I'm at it, I thought it might be helpful just to kind of show you what a bad crimp looks like. I took a knife and carved back some of that glued on shrink tubing. It was hard to get to, but look, you can see how this is really badly pinched right here. And then it's pinched over on this side as well. So this is what happens when you use a crimper that is not rated for this gauge of wire, and you can end up creating these really bad pinched crimps. And I probably did this a year or so ago, and I really should have gone back and corrected it. And but this is, and the only reason I point this out is because I think it's extremely important. A lot of us kind of get into the mindset that it's good enough, and this is showing you that this is an example that it is not good enough. You can actually cause a fire with this if you run this system all the way up to its, in this case, this 200 amp load that this cable should be able to handle. This crimp was not. So the cable wasn't going to burst into flames, but this crimp was definitely getting hot enough to melt that shrink tubing and create a potential problem. So this is why it's important to make sure you've got the right tools for the job. And if you're crimping 2-aught cable, terminals on 2-aught cable, you got to make sure that you got a crimper that is capable of 2-aught gauge. Otherwise, you end up with garbage like this that is a potential fire hazard. So learn your lesson. Do as I say, not as I did. So I'm going to take my own advice. I do have a newer crimper now, and I'm going to create a new one with a much better crimp. All right, I've got a new piece here, and just to kind of show you what the new crimps look like, they look like this. So I've got a particular divot on there. They make ones that are sort of either septagonal or octagonal, and this is not one of those. But this gives me a nice clean crimp, and I'll show you what I used for that. I bought this off of Amazon. So obviously not a sponsored thing. This is a very inexpensive crimp. You just pull the spring up. You set your terminal in there. In my case, I like to have the divot on the bottom of the ring terminal, and then you give it make sure your cable's in there properly, and you give it a really good whack on the top with a heavy hammer, like a mini sledge. In fact, you probably give it 2 or 3 whacks, and you end up with a very nice crimp. I've actually seen some video of these being cut open, and they are solid all the way through and no gaps. So I kind of trust this thing. Yeah, and we'll see how this performs once I get the shrink tubing shrunk. And while I'm at it, let's just go ahead and talk about this. So when you're putting your shrink tubing on there, you want to make sure that it is not coming up onto the ring terminal surface where it needs to make contact with your bus bar or your battery terminals or whatever. So you want to make sure the shrink tubing is right behind that so that it's not going to interfere with the connection that you make with the ring terminal. All right, I re-crimped that little cable, created a new one with a good crimp on it, put it back up and started running the test again. And again, immediately noticed I was getting much, much hotter temperatures on this one lug on the positive side of the bus bar. And take a look here. I actually realized that the problem is now on the bus bar itself. They actually, or I think because that terminal had gotten so hot, it actually started melting the the mounting material around this bus bar. And that created a problem where this stud was not being able to be kept in a vertical orientation, creating a problem getting a clean contact to the bus bar. And now, even though I've got a good crimp, this bus bar is not allowing me to make good contact on this terminal. And that's a problem. So I decided to go ahead and do this completely right, maybe over-engineer this slightly. So I've traded this 250 amp rated bus bar for a 400 amp bus bar. And you can see how much more significantly thicker that bus bar is. And it is a copper bus bar. So I also have slightly larger studs on these as well, but this will just ensure that I get much better contact and can handle these higher amperages without running into that kind of problem. So let me go ahead and put these new bus bars in place. I've got a negative and a positive, and we will get this test back on the road. All right, got my new bus bars in, and I have terminated several cables to make sure that I can handle these larger studs, because some of the ring terminals that I had on there before were a little too small. And so I fixed all that. Again, ignore this. This is not ideal. This is just temporary. And let me go ahead and add power from the battery to our AC inverters. And I've got my timer set here. We're currently pulling 56 amps here. So let me kind of zoom in on that. All right, so we can keep an eye on that. So let me start adding some load here. All right, and that gets us up to 207 amps. Let's see if we can pull that full 207 for a full 10 minutes. All right, so full 10 minutes at just over 200 amps, so 207 amps approximately. So the load test on this 200 amp BMS is a definite pass. All right, let's find out what else we can do to this thing. All right, since I can't get the temperatures outside to cooperate, I'm gonna put the battery in here. You can see I got it laid in there. It should be pretty close to freezing anyway, because it was out all night. So it's only should be maybe 5 or 10 degrees max above freezing. And here I've got the set point set to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm gonna let that sit in there all day, and then later tonight we're gonna take a look and see if this low temp has been triggered or not. All right, it's actually been probably a solid 24 hours at this point. And I actually had, at some point halfway through, moved the set point down to around 5 degrees, and we are at 3 degrees Fahrenheit right now. So we should be pretty much a solid block of ice. So let me get this thing out of there and put it on the bench, and we'll see if it takes a charge or not. All right, starting to get a little bit of condensation on there from the temperature change. Let's go ahead and connect my charger, and we'll see what it does. All right. It is not charging. So I have the charger plugged in. We have the green indicator light, but you notice the charger fan on there is completely silent. We are not getting a charge. So I think I'm going to go ahead and just let this sit and see if the battery will thaw out in this room. It's not super warm in this room, but let's see, we are at about 48 degrees Fahrenheit. So yeah, it's probably going to take several hours for this thing to thaw out, since I had it at such a cold state. But we'll see if it resumes charging on its own. It should, once that internal temperature comes up above 32 degrees Fahrenheit. But yeah, we'll verify that that behaves like it should. All right, it has been a couple hours. We're still not charging yet. It's not super surprising, because like I said, I froze this thing really solidly. But let's just double check and see if we are getting any voltage out of the battery right now. Go ahead and disconnect this so I'm not getting any false readings from the charger. But let's see here. Yeah, we are getting 13 volts, which is about what I would expect from this battery. So the BMS in this battery is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and it is allowing us at this point to discharge the battery, which is safe. But until that temperature rises a little further, it's not going to permit us to actually put a charge into the battery. So far so good. We'll check back in a couple more hours and see if it's actually started resuming charging. Might help if I go ahead and reconnect the negative lead here. Yeah, so we'll check back in a little bit. All right, so it's about an hour and a half from the last clip, and you can see we are now charging. Got a red light. You might be able to hear the fan on the charger. So it's taking a charge. The low temp cutoff and charge resumption is definitely working as designed, so that's a pass. So I think the next step is let's crack this thing open and take a look at the internal build quality. Well, getting into these things is an absolute bear. There's just no way to get inside these batteries, these ABS plastic cases, without basically destroying them. And you can see here, actually, I clipped this main positive lead here. I don't know if I did that with my oscillating tool or I did it while I was using my little chisel here. But in any case, I did split the insulation on there, the jacketing, so that's not great. But just some first initial impressions here. One thing I do notice is it's not all just, packed together with foam as cheaply as possible. There's actually a metal frame in here holding everything together. There's a top layer on the cells here on the side. You can see the cells are actually laid sideways, and the connectors are down there with the bus bars on the side. But on the top, they have a layer of fiberboard protecting that, but then the BMS is actually attached to this metal frame, which is pretty nice. And this looks like a pretty solid BMS as well. I just want to point out, as I'm removing more stuff here, the BMS balance lead connectors and the temperature probe connectors are all glued into place, which is nice because if vibration were to cause this to disconnect, then all of a sudden your battery doesn't work right. So it's nice that they have basically taken adhesive and made sure that these are not going to pop off just sort of willy-nilly with a little bit of vibration. They've also put some abrasion tape, like on either side here near the positive and negative connectors on this, so that the, again, for vibration purposes, if this positive and negative lead were to be touching against that and vibrate, they don't want that to eventually go through the insulation. So they have some anti-abrasion tape there as well. So there's a pretty nice attention to detail is what I'm seeing so far. Got the BMS bracket off, take the little fiberboard cover off, and nice prismatic cells. And there's about a 1-inch gap or so on the sides. So that all looks pretty good. Let me see if I can get these cells actually removed from here. Okay, I got the cells out, and we can see that the bus bars are actually attached with laser welds, which is nice. Again, we've glued down the balance leads there and put abrasion tape where necessary. And let's see what else have we got. Yeah, like a clear view of the QR codes. I'm going to write down some of these numbers and look them up and find out when the manufacture date was. Vent ports here, they are all clean here. They don't look like they have been obstructed in any way. The way the thing lays down, they're sideways. So there's a nice gap here in the case, so that the, like I said, in this case, about a 1-inch gap between the vent port and the side of the case. So they're not being obstructed in any way. These can vent. I don't see any swelling in the cells. Everything looks very symmetrical, which is exactly what you want to see. So no indication here that these are not anything than what they are represented as. All right, just taking a quick look at the main conductors here off the positive terminal. This is a really beefy 1/0 gauge positive cable here, very short length, which means it's appropriate for its purpose. Now, this is something that I added because I had a slight nick there on the jacketing. And these are silicone rubber, high temperature silicone rubber jacketed cables. The main negatives here are 6 gauge as well, and they're grouped into a series of 3 into a single ring terminal crimp there, as is the same on the output side here from the batteries. So yeah, so the gauge of the cable looks appropriate to their purpose. And yeah, I think I'm seeing a very high quality battery assembly here from this WattCycle 200 amp hour battery. Okay, so I did go and look up the battery codes on all 8 of the battery cells in this unit, and it seems that all 8 of those cells had a very recent manufacture date. So 7 of them were manufactured on October 14th, 2024, and that remaining one was manufactured one day earlier on October 13th. So in any case, these are clearly not repurposed or reused cells. These are new cells, and the cell manufacturer, by the way, is a company called Great Power. And I did go and look them up to see who they are, and they're definitely a well-established Tier 1 energy storage manufacturer, and they've got over 10,000 employees. They've been in business since 2001, and they are a publicly traded company since 2015. So definitely not a fly-by-night operation on the cell manufacturer. And as you saw from the teardown, WattCycle does appear to be using quality materials and assembly methods to ensure that these things are very well built and able to withstand a wide variety of working environments and make sure they provide a long service life. Now, in terms of pricing, at the time that I'm recording this, WattCycle has this particular 12-volt 200 amp hour battery sale price on their website at $399, which is a very competitive price when you consider that that's typically what you'd pay for something from a comparable brand that only has a 100 amp BMS. Now, that's with or without a low temp cutoff protection. This one, of course, has that. And some additional good news is that right before I sat down to record this final clip, WattCycle did send me a discount code that'll bring that final price from their website from $399 down to about $375, which makes this one of the better deals that I've seen on a 12 volt 200 amp hour battery with a 200 amp BMS. And while I was exploring WattCycle's website, I did notice that they have a variety of battery options from 12 volt all the way up to 48 volt, including battery options for trolling motor and golf cart applications and things like that. So as far as I can tell from this one sample at least, WattCycle does seem to be a pretty stand-up company offering very well-built battery solutions at extremely competitive prices. And it's always good to see new budget brand options coming into the marketplace, and but offering very good build quality. So that's a definite win for all of us. And they do also sell many of their battery models on Amazon as well. So I'll put links to both the Amazon and their website for you in the video description below, if you do want to go check those out and see if they might have something that you might happen to be in the market for. So I do hope you found at least something in the video useful or informative. If you did, please consider clicking that like button for me. I'd very much appreciate that. And do let me know in the comments below what you think about this battery, if you've had any experience with WattCycle, and also if you have any questions about this battery that I didn't already answer for you. I do thank you for joining me for this video, and I hope you'll consider joining me for the next one. Until then, have fun out there.